On. Hi, Dr. Kurt Jefferson. Thanks for another curiosity conversation. Today, I want to explore your brain with AI, and in particular, I always hesitate from saying the future of these things because we're living it right now. Yeah, who cares about the future? We got to worry about today. But how? What is the today of education, leadership, global issues in light of AI, ChatGPT, and other AI tools? I know we're both, just so listeners are aware, I don't think either of us would call ourselves an expert in AI, but we are probably experts in education. Yourself, expert in leadership, and we're both super curious about AI. So I know we've been kind of, been exploring with open eyes and ears. And you're in the thick of it there in Spalding University, not just as a university professor, but as a dean. So I'm really kind of curious with you. I'll share a little bit on some of the stuff I've been hearing from folks, but starting off, what's your perspective on AI? And let's start with education.
Yeah, greetings, Matt. Absolutely. Thank you for having me on the program again. And I, um, know that you have been studying this for well over a year now, and maybe longer, and especially ChatGPT, but also the ramifications of AI in general. And I know you and I have been talking about the ramifications of AI for going back into the COVID-19 pandemic and some of the conversations and work we were doing, exploring curiously and looking at how curiosity ties to artificial intelligence. Um, I think in the university community and in the American higher education, and I would assume that can be extrapolated to global higher ed as well. But we have, as I always say, around 5,000 institutions of higher ed, from community colleges to uh, senior colleges and universities, privates and publics, and big research universities and medium-sized research universities, and smaller teaching universities that do graduate and level master's and doctoral programs like Spalding University in Louisville, Kentucky. But um, this past year, we started investigating a little bit more what was being said about AI in education because of the advent of the Chat GPT. And I think my first exposure was through you
Yeah.
coming and talking to some of my doctoral students in
Right.
the leadership program.
Yeah. I just it seems like forever ago, but that's right. Because even then, I was still just learning. Again, not as an expert. I think there are very few experts, to be honest. There's a lot of fake experts, but yeah, we're all. Um,
Well, and I gave, so what I did after I learned a little bit about it from much of the links and documents and things you sent me, I got on and played around with it a little bit, and then gave a presentation on ChatGPT to a community group here in Louisville. And I knew it would be interesting to them because most of these folks were,
well,
65, 70, 75,
yeah,
some upwards of 80, 85. And, not to be ageist, but I think a lot in that generation don't quite, have the tech skills. They didn't grow up with the internet. And
yeah,
so I wanted them to see that when you take the US Constitution, the Bible, general historical pieces of literature, if you're an old English professor, not old, but an English
I know what
professor,
you're saying.
and taking different types of classical works that they would physically have picked up and read, and then asking ChatGPT to comment on,
Hmm.
you know, uh, whoever it is, Herman Melville, or
Yeah,
comment on a famous Paul's letter to the Romans or something. You're really starting to see a unique set of writings and things coming out by AI that are really hard to detect and understand. Um, the level of kind of analytical
yeah,
precision with them. So I wanted them to see, though, that there are problems with ChatGPT, for example, in terms
yeah.
of citations and other things that I think keen-eyed faculty would be looking at, and that's
Mhm.
that's gotten into the discussion here that I think what it started as kind of a hypercritical, oh my goodness, this is going to lead to faculty losing their jobs, has shifted over even 7 or 8 months to, wait a minute, students can leverage this for their own
Yeah.
professional success. Faculty can leverage it as
Well,
long as we can control the terms of it. I'll just leave it at that for now.
no, well, it's interesting because I can't take, no matter how hard I try, I can't take off my teacher hat. I realize I'm going now. I think mentioned before in one of the last ones. I'm just now the Tyler Durden of education is my new approach, I guess. But you mentioned something there. I can't get this teacher hat off because I hear that and I go, wow, what a fantastic learning opportunity. Because I would say have ChatGPT do it and have them completely flub the citations. Because guess what happens then? Now I, the human teacher, can come in and go, look, these citations are wrong because of X, Y, and Z. Here's how to do it correctly. And then because the old way of teaching citations is, hey, everybody sit down, shut up, don't talk to each other. I'm going to write on the board and give you a handout of how to do citations, and then take it home, look at it, study it, and I'm going to give you a quiz to see if you remembered, if you memorized this handout correctly, and listen to my voice long enough while I'm not talking to each other. And that's the old way. And now we can go, oh, you didn't learn citations yet. Cool. This is not proper. Here's how to make a proper one. And now from now on, use ChatGPT to this degree, but you're going to have to come in and use your human brain and what we just learned in class. And that's just one small example of, countless places that it could be used. Now, I'm not faulting teachers because this is new to them as well. I'm just always looking for teachers or educators who have the right mindset, that it doesn't matter what technology is going to be thrown at them. The opposite of what you described as the teacher with the stained lecture notes. Like, I got the yellow notes.
Yeah.
The opposite of that. Those kinds of teachers, it doesn't matter if it's ChatGPT or the next iteration or the next technology.
Exactly.
They'll always be fine because they'll find new. And it sounds like, to the credit, it sounds like in your experience, more or less, that's kind of what's been happening. There's been a greater embracing of this. There's the shift from, oh no, what is it? How can we build up the walls and keep it out? Has shifted rather quickly to an embracing, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think one of the things that I think on our conversations on your program here, and we're getting curious together and talking about leadership and curiosity, and specifically education. We've been talking the last few weeks about sports. I think what's interesting to me is this dialectic, that is always kind of, taking place in education. And it takes place, I think, in all economic settings and social settings, even political settings, historically. And that is, your point about your people are riding horses, and then all of a sudden one day a Henry Ford and actually people prior to him who are inventing automobiles, and they're learning how to build bigger, faster automobiles, and then using systems and modalities that are allowing them to increase production and enhance the mechanization of the product. And it's really interesting because we've had 2 or 3 really robust, fascinating conversations. Our president here, Tory Murden McClure at Spalding's, jumped in and made some really interesting comments. And
Nice.
And we've had some, I've really liked it because it's been good to hear the president from kind of a presidential level at a university weigh in. And she's been actually like, hey, I mean, we need to think about just embracing it and just being open to it. I think I agree with her in general. Yet I also have the curmudgeonly kind of liberal arts professor in the back of my mind saying, is this going to replace faculty at some point? Am I going to lose my job? Or my colleagues going to lose jobs? And I think the thing I think back to is, and this is more recent history, 20 years ago was Wikipedia. And I remember, and you remember this, we were teaching together, and we have colleagues who I can tell we could out them here on X, but we won't do that, who were saying Wikipedia is essentially of the devil, and if I won't allow students to cite it at all, it's terrible and all this. And then I was at the time writing a book on Celtic politics, British history, the history of Ireland, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and I was using 40% of my sources were coming from Wikipedia, and they were all legitimate. It wasn't this debate over, oh, we're going to get one side of a political, Northern Ireland from the Republican side versus the Unionist side, and then it gets into they start stripping each other's references on Wikipedia because it's a mediated type thing. But it was more legitimate. I needed data on electoral things and historical things and so forth. And then when I found the actual sources, and I went and I read them and kept them and collated them, filed them, put them in the bibliography, I was like, this is legitimate. There's nothing wrong with this. It's BBC, it's books, it's periodicals.
It was a gateway to the sources you needed. And nobody
absolutely
on people who find ways to do things, as you mentioned, bigger, faster, bigger, better, faster, I should say. Yeah. Whether it's writing or whether it's citing sources or whatever, anything that can reduce what's the word? I would say mundanity, like the mundane aspect of life, better.
Exactly.
And and
monotony as well. I think, not just mundane elements, but you're right. Well, and I think one of the bigger takeaways for me on this, the whole AI thing is, I mean, we will get to the, going to the nth degree with AI, and this gets into, is this going to lead to, chat bots and war bots and other things that have interesting kind of, psychosocial technological ramifications? Are we going to see, some of these former movies that we've watched as kids and as adults, Terminator, and I'm trying to think of the big one, 2001: A Space Odyssey, going back many, many years. All of that kind of stuff coming to fruition. I was just reading about in The Economist of a book on the life of Ian Fleming, the guy who founded the James Bond series novels, and have read a lot of those novels, watched all of the movies. But it was interesting that, John F. Kennedy was a big fan of the James Bond series, and they weren't very well known outside of Britain. This was 1962 or 3. And he was asking Ian Fleming, he invited him to he was not president yet. He was trying to run for president, but he invited him to Washington, and they're talking, and he's saying, how would James Bond, Kennedy literally asked him, how would James Bond handle Fidel Castro? And, and the answer was he would make him, look silly, not handle him in like a serious way. But what's interesting is this is the point, is that fantasy and fiction start to become reality. And I'd love to hear your comments on this regarding things like AI, ChatGPT, other things, because I think, this is where we've seen in recent years, the tech has become so important to our existence that, the way things were done in the past becomes, kind of put out of the back burner. But yet at the same time, I think we have to be very careful of, and this is my critique of AI, we have to be very careful of saying that every answer is on this thing, because it's not,
Sure. You brought up a couple things there. There's something I wanted to share, but I'll back burner that because you brought up the Kennedy and the James Bond or Ian Fleming example. And it's interesting that you brought that example because, again, my basic understanding of it, but with ChatGPT and these language models, what it allows you to do, again, it's not necessarily, does your homework and all. People focus on the wrong things. It's a chat, but it allows you to have a conversation with anybody. So we look back at John F. Kennedy and go, wow, that's so cool he was able to do that. But here's what people are missing is that's what ChatGPT is. It allows you to have a conversation with Ian Fleming right now. You can ask Ian Fleming how he deal with what's going on in Israel, Palestine, or you could ask Ian Fleming what you should have for dinner and what's the best recipe to have.
Isn't that interesting?
Jamaica. And even better than that, because ultimately what this AI allows you to do, it allows any individual to have a conversation with everyone or anyone. And that's an incredibly powerful thing, whether you're an innovator, an educator, or just a curious person. that, and again, I can shout from the mountaintops, you know, stop having this stuff try to cheat for you or write your papers. Have it help you write better papers.
Isn't
Instead
that
of sitting down,
interesting?
like, write this essay, say, all right, William Shakespeare, how would you approach the opening paragraph of this essay that I'm trying to write? You know what I mean? Hey, Bukowski, what would be pull on people, like people you that are impossible, air quotes, right, to have conversations with. You can have conversations with them right now. And that's the whole, like, the secret sauce of AI isn't that it's magic. And I keep stressing this because this is where the importance of human curiosity comes in and human input comes in, or the importance of it is because AI is only creating and responding based on us. It really is a reflection on who we are, because it's not making stuff up. At least my understanding is, at this point, it's searching everything, and it's aggregating everything we've already done, suggested, and believe, and just making it more accessible for us to do that. And if people understand that it's there more to have a conversation with and to build ideas rather than just to replace you, I think there's less risk of it replacing things, or people, I should even say.
Yeah, I think that, Matt, that's genius. I mean, you're laying it out on a level that I think a lot of us faculty are back,
Yeah.
this far in front of our nose. You're getting us out here, and for me, I mean, from a data standpoint and a data driven standpoint, this could potentially allow us to essentially moneyball curiosity. I mean, if
Yeah.
you think about it, I mean,
Well,
it
look.
literally allows us to set up a series of understanding data
Yeah.
and understanding, phenomena, social, economic, political, historical, whatever, in a way that we can build models that help us get at causation,
Yeah.
outcomes, a real behavioral scientist
Well,
kind of approach.
create models and run scenarios. I was just speaking with an engineer and physicist yesterday, Adolfo, and he was talking about it from an engineering standpoint, because he brought up, it was just fascinating, two different conversations. You use the same words. You're talking about,
Isn't
from
that interesting?
science
Yeah.
and engineering, but it's the same idea. Like, you both identified the same kind of, hey, I could use this as a scientist. I
Yeah.
could use
Yeah, well,
the
and it's interesting. It's
model.
interesting you bring that up, and the Adolfo and my kind of
Yeah.
analysis is vectoring together, and that is that I'm a social scientist,
Yeah.
but my mind and heart are more like yours. I'm more of a
Well,
humanistic person in my kind of approach to phenomenology and
well,
other kinds of things, from a
let me drop this
methodological
one on you,
standpoint.
because it's gonna. I don't want to lose it. It's fresh. So the call before with you, I was with you right now. I was getting curious with Nestor Santos, and he's a
Ah,
professor at Universidad Industrial de Santander in Bucaramanga, Colombia. Another engineer. And he was telling, and I couldn't wait to share this with you and other educators, because he was telling me about a class he just had with a group of university students. He goes, Matt, you won't believe how we just used ChatGPT. So what he did is he had a class where it's part lecture presentation, but the bulk is then Q&A. Yeah.
sure.
He took out his phone, he just pressed record, let it run the whole course. When it was done, he downloaded a transcript of his lecture and all of the Q&A, all the questions they asked and his answers. And he put into ChatGPT, he said, please put this into a single document summarizing the main points students need to remember from the lecture and to have for the course. And boom, in minutes, it
So it
created
creates a study
a
guide,
quiz,
essentially.
a study guide, because he said all my students kept asking me, like, hey, do you have notes from that last class? Do you have notes from these
Yeah,
questions? Because, or this is going to be on the test, make sure you know these things and all that.
right.
It, without doing any effort, just recording it and then uploading the transcript. And again, he could change the output based on this prompt. He could say, make this as a quiz, turn it into a
Wow.
quiz and an answer key, or he could say, create a
Yep.
study guide for students or whatever
Yeah.
else. So as an
Create a small
educator, you
book.
can on and on and on. Yeah. So, but but so far it seems to be happening in vacuums. You know what I mean? Like that was Nestor in Columbia.
Right.
But there's a professor in Louisville, Kentucky, who could use this idea. And so I'm always curious on how we can get those experiences and ideas kind of colliding faster. And
Well, and I think, I mean, that's awesome and it's fascinating. I think to just let you know a little more, let me talk just briefly about the rubber
please,
meeting
yeah,
the road on what the universities are doing, from what I can tell.
yeah,
And I know there's, you know, what's evolving, I'm sure, are entire courses that specifically focus on not just AI, but even Chat GPT, even more narrow at
yeah,
bigger research universities. And not only evidently, I mean, not evidently, definitely in computer engineering departments and so forth, they're doing this stuff. And we all know that for a fact. But what's interesting from an administrative, let me talk with my dean hat on for a minute, because
mhm,
that's where I become more of a social scientist, because we do a lot of, and I'm just going to use a bad way to describe it, a lot of bean counting, because we end up having to run budgets and
yeah,
all kinds of administrative things. And if, you know, we try to money ball, find efficiencies, etc. But on this topic, what I found, both here at my university, Spalding University, but also what's going on at the bigger universities, is one, they're just trying to get their wrap their minds around it. And I think the
yeah,
first reaction, many universities, I know for a fact because I was in a meeting where one of the leaders of you know, a dean or a associate provost or a provost or somebody at University of Central Florida, it's a large university, I think the biggest in Florida, 65 to 80,000 students in Orlando. They had already created a council. It was an AI council. They had representation from across
wow,
the university, and they're just grappling with these questions. Largely, how do we leverage it? To your point, a
yeah,
little more glass half full. There's
mhm,
always going to be the, you know, the quiet political scientist or English professor sitting in the background saying tyranny of
sure. We
metric.
all know Latin now.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, this is going to end up leading to high levels of plagiarism and laziness on student parts and things like that.
Yeah,
I'm not negating that.
sure,
I
sure.
think that's a legitimate point. I think, you know, the point what you raised, I think brilliantly, importantly, is if we can get students to see the bigger picture, and staff and faculty, I mean
Yeah,
leaders too,
yeah,
it can be used in constructive ways that can help the university. It can help the university maybe even financially. There's a way to leverage it for a revenue stream or something. You know, I know a lot of AI is driven toward using data for revenue. So that is just like most Moneyball type things that are going
yeah,
on in cyberspace nowadays in the digital area. But I also think, you know, looking at where it can go awry is another part of this.
sure.
And so as you look at kind of the landscape of, you know, universities are really interesting. They're supposed to teach and promote creativity, scholarly insight,
Yeah,
curiosity, what you do and what you're so great at. Um, you know, a genuine discourse. And obviously, we are in a period of civilization or civilizations globally where, you know, a lot of these kind of things have been challenged. Some are under threat, freedom of speech, other kinds of things. But I do think AI does have the positive potential on this front. So I think that underscores a little bit of some of the things you're saying. And lastly, universities are putting groups together to study this and
nice.
make recommendations. And I realize we get narrow and a little wonky and focus on policies sometimes. But I think here, one of the things I've liked about what our president and some of our other academic leaders have said is let's not get too narrow that way. Because when you create a policy, then you start to, you know, squelch innovation and other things outside
Yeah,
that could may have to bend around the policy. But at the same time, I think you do have to be realistic that, you know, if every student is going to try to write, if students are going to try to write every paper with Chat GPT and think they don't have to do any independent thinking or critical analysis, then they need to think again.
Yeah. No, those are all excellent points, and I don't know. The only thing I would have to add is just wrapping up. There's one other thing I just thought I'd share. We just have a, I think I can do it in the last few minutes here. We can explore it more, but something just kind of get your take on, and also I get to experiment, seeing if I can do a third screen here on the live stream. I'm still learning all of
Cool. Yeah.
But have you had a chance yet? And again, I can't take that teacher hat off, right? But have you had a chance yet to explore the Bing image creator?
I have not.
All right. If you haven't, whatever update and everything else was just, I think, last week or recently. But oh my goodness, it is so, because I've been able to fool around a little with mainly DALL-E. And this is, I guess, a version of that.
Oh, cool.
But it's wildly different. And I think I can do a screen share here. So one of the things I'm doing is going back to the book of What If and sharing some of the articles and, or the entries from it.
Outstanding.
But sharing it, I'm trying to, I'm not an artist, so I'm using these image creators to come up with the images. And it's fascinating because essentially I'm asking AI to create an image on a philosophical question. And not only have the images it's creating really interesting, but it leads to so many other questions or so much other learning. And I'm wondering how educators could use AI to introduce concepts and learning, not from a traditional like reading of a text, but through a question or a statement and an image, right? So,
oh, I love that. I think we're in a visual generation. It's so important to be able to do that. Absolutely.
100%. So one of the things that I found really interesting was when I could go back to some of the other, so like one of the questions that I had was, what if the sun never went down, right? So the images that it created were interesting because,
wow,
right? Because it tries to get the concept of what that's like, and just to be able to go and explore, like, what do these mean? I asked stuff like, what if one of the things they talked about with the sun going down would be there'd be like in some places there'd be permanent dusk. So to see what kind of images it creates for these, yeah. But
yeah, and it's interesting, Matt. You're talking about this on the day that we had the solar eclipse in the United States and in some of the areas of the country, including Louisville. Here, I didn't get outside to see it because it's cloudy today, but I think we did have a solar eclipse come in this sector of the country of the United States.
I think you're right. If I didn't realize this is completely by accident, that I need to ask it just, and again, this is very little direction. I just wrote permanent dusk, or what if, the sun never went. But just like eclipse, like someone who doesn't even know what a solar eclipse is, they could just type in solar eclipse, and regardless of what it generates, and again, the whole idea is getting people curious, right? The old lecture model of learning about solar eclipses by sitting in rows and listening to someone's, take out your books and take out, notepad and take notes. There's new ways to do it, but this is the one that captured my curiosity so much today. Is there's an entry in the book called, on what if there were no trees. So I found this fascinating because these are the images when I put in what if there were no trees. That's all I asked it. What if there were no trees?
Wow.
But what I noticed is in every single one of these images, right, there are trees. Yeah. And it had me thinking about other, like, what does it say about AI in general? Like when we ask a question, you're asking it to create an image, like what if there were no trees? And its defaults, one for whatever reason, is that those are barren. There weren't really trees. I mean, they were dead trees, but it still puts trees in there. It's still not really creating.
Exactly. Its level of reflection is kind of binary in some ways, that it really doesn't completely think outside the box as part of the, and this is what I think we want from AI is for it to think outside the box, as we know that's when it comes to problem solving and curiosity specifically, you really, to your point on using examples from the book of What If, and I encourage those viewing this program and listening to get a copy of Matt's book of What If, because it really just those basic exercises and asking questions of what if get you thinking outside of your normal patterns of thinking, which it apparently, according to your example here, even AI falls into the dualistic trap or binary trap or whatever you want to call it
Mhm.
intellectually. And that's not good. We sometimes do need a third and a fourth and a fifth way in terms of solutions to problems.
Yeah. No. So it was just fascinating. Again, I don't even, that happened this morning, but it just set my mind. It made me think about AI in ways that I hadn't thought before. And I don't know if it's a limitation, but just kind of it's the parameters or whatever, but just something that I'm surprised how much I can learn just visually
Right.
using AI. And there's others
Well,
I don't want to share too much more now. We can go back into it later, but I'm looking
yeah,
at this too. But I want you to finish off there too. But I want to encourage you to check out the image creator and just see,
that's cool.
focus on ChatGPT so much and just like, here, type this up, now create this other content. It's fascinating to think where we're visually in other mediums
Yeah,
that are going to be
yeah.
affected by.
No, and I think that's really, really cool. And I think, and I'll make one final comment and I'll be
Yeah.
quiet. But I do think that, I'm glad you brought the book of What If up because I think what you do in that book is to get people thinking and reflecting in ways that they wouldn't normally be thinking and reflecting. And that's the whole point of education, back to your teacher hat. And
Yeah.
I know what kind of teacher you are. I've worked with you. We've shared a lot of the same students in our different classes that we've taught between us at our previous stop in Missouri at a university. But I do think when I look at the chapter that I wrote for the most recent book, my security studies book with Tobias Gibson, which was on study abroad, one of
Mm-hmm.
the reasons I quoted you and cited your book was because the kind of education universities are under assault. And we talked about this last week a little bit, and I
Yep.
think for good reasons. I mean, what's the relevance, et cetera. But universities, if they forget the core idea of getting students to ask why, how, when, how do I do certain things? What if this happens? What does it lead? Even hypothetical, basic scientific hypothetical thinking. If we quit asking that,
Mm-hmm.
then you're really not going to be able to one lead people to a greater level of thinking and critical analysis, and that's why we ultimately, and that's simplistic, but that's ultimately why
Oh,
we exist.
yep.
And What If helps us. That book, what I was trying to say is the Chinese, the Europeans, the Russians, others want to come to our universities in the United States and in the West to get more of a critical thinking. I'm not saying they can't get it in South Africa, China. Those are countries with solid universities too. But the kind of thinking that we're doing is why they're coming abroad to study. And now India is the largest study
Mm-hmm.
abroad consumer and partner of
Oh,
the United States and our universities. So wanted to end on a positive note with regard to the What
yeah.
If
Yeah,
book of What
definitely.
If.
Well, thank you, and I'm excited. I'm going to keep this. We didn't even touch on sports today, um, and while we did,
Exactly.
I don't think we mentioned leadership. We definitely talked about it. Again, everything's connected to that. But I definitely want to continue these conversations about AI with you. I'm really fascinated by what you shared today, and maybe we could even get into AI in leadership and sports in the future conversations as well.
Love it. Thank you,
Cool.
Matt. Been great
Yeah.
talking to you.
Have a great one. Thanks so much.
Thank you.